Call to order. Good afternoon. I call this hearing to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Before we proceed, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items for the remote hearing. First, if you're experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to use the video function for the duration of their participation in the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is the committee and subcommittee policy that members will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning your microphone on and off during an in-person hearing. This is out of courtesy to all the members on the subcommittee, and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for a couple of seconds before speaking so that we will be able to hear everything you say. In order to ensure everything members say is captured on the live stream of this hearing, I ask that members pause for 2 to 3 seconds before beginning to speak. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the documents to veteranaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of the subcommittee seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. I ask unanimous consent that Representative Mace be permitted to join today's hearing so that we can speak about the legislation under consideration or related issues and legislation. Without objection, so ordered. Does any member have a question about the procedures for this hearing? Hearing none, we shall proceed. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Thank you for all joining us today for the Technology Modernization Subcommittee's first ever legislative hearing. Today's agenda includes bipartisan legislation covering several issues that the subcommittee has conducted hearings and oversight on this Congress. As a sponsor and co-sponsor of several of the bills before this subcommittee today, I am proud of the work we have done to oversee VA's large modernization effort and to ensure that veterans' information is secure. In July, the subcommittee held a hearing to discuss the results of 2 reports from the VA Office of the Inspector General, highlighting VA's failure to conduct a reliable lifecycle cost estimate for the Electronic Health Record Modernization Program. Specifically, the IG repeatedly found unreliable and incomplete estimates for upgrades and costs, as well as inadequate reporting, which has affected transparency to Congress. Given the size and the scope of EHRM program, the lack of accurate cost estimates hamper VA's ability to provide Congress with an accurate picture of the cost and scale of the real need to modernize IT and physical infrastructure at VA medical centers. My bill, the VA Electronic Health Record Transparency Act of 2021, will address these issues. The bill will require VA to look at all costs across VHA, OIT, and any other program for any amount expended on EHRM, including for infrastructure projects. It is clear to me that these infrastructure costs are a product of years of neglected infrastructure and therefore not unique to EHRM. However, these upgrades are being expedited in order to make the EHRM program viable. I know I am interested in finding out the true cost of this large modernization program, and I know that this bill will help us get that information. I hope my colleagues will support this effort. I am also pleased that we will be considering a draft bill on the collection of certain demographic data of beneficiaries of the Department of Veteran Affairs. This bill will improve data collection by VA for beneficiaries and provide a better understanding of who VA is serving. There is no reason that across VA we cannot have a standardized version of beneficiary information to better serve veterans. In an ideal world, there would be a single source of truth for veterans' demographic data. Until then, it is important that the data is available in order to improve access to quality care and benefits. I would like to welcome the organizations that have chosen to participate in our second panel today that will speak to the importance of collecting this information. I hope my colleagues will support this bill as well. I look forward to working with them to finalize this legislation and introduce it shortly. A solution that works for all parties involved is in the best interest of Congress and the best interests of veterans we serve. In closing, I look forward to today's conversation. Your expertise and input are valuable to us as we craft legislation. I would like to now recognize my colleague, Ranking Member Rosendale, to deliver any opening remarks he may have. Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to be with everyone today. I appreciate our witnesses joining us today for the Technology Modernization Subcommittee's first legislative hearing. For the benefit of all concerned, I'd like to read our legislative jurisdiction from the committee's rules. And it includes, and I quote, VA enterprise technology modernization programs and projects, including the Electronic Health Record Modernization Program, enterprise IT governance, cybersecurity matters, and data management, end quote. In time, many legislative bodies tend to stray from their original purposes. It's important to memorialize that we were put here to improve the management of VA IT to produce better results for the veterans. I will now turn to the bills on the agenda. The Electronic Health Record Transparency Act would require VA to report on EHRM programs' actual expenditures. I agree that the time has come to do that. We're already monitoring the program's obligations, but once VA places funding on the Cerner contract and other contracts, it goes into a black box. I'm particularly concerned about this spending because the VA apparently believes they can resume implementing the Cerner EHR without demonstrating any quality or safety improvements. Next, my bill, the VA IT Reform Act, would put an end to the VA's practice of starting multi-million-dollar and multi-billion-dollar IT projects without publicly articulating their budgets, schedules, and objectives. It is inexcusable that not one of the IT projects that we oversee in this subcommittee, not a single one of them, was authorized by Congress. The four largest projects total more than $27 billion. As for the smaller projects, the budget doesn't contain a complete list, and the VA has never provided one. That means we can't even say for sure how many projects exist. Even worse, when all these projects started, the VA failed to provide the basic information necessary to authorize them. We owe it to our veterans to do better. The legislation would prohibit the VA from spending money on any new large IT projects until cost estimates, schedules, and performance objectives are submitted. It would also set minimum requirements for the teams that manage such projects. Finally, it would make reports available to Congress that the VA already is submitting to the Office of Management and Budget. I want to thank the chairman and Mr. Banks for introducing this legislation with me. Moving on, the Veteran Cyber Risk Awareness Act would task VA to conduct a communications and outreach campaign about cyber risks. Rather than attempt to reinvent the wheel, the VA would rely on other federal agencies and companies with more expertise in this area. This legislation strikes a careful balance by tackling a very real issue while not distracting the VA from its core mission, not wasting resources. Finally, there's a draft of the VA Demographic Data Collection Improvement Act. This bill would direct, and I quote, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs shall collect the covered demographic data of each beneficiary of the Department of Veterans Affairs who accesses a program or service of the department. The covered demographic data includes, and I quote, legal name, preferred name, race, including any Native American or Alaskan Native affiliation, ethnicity, religion or identification with a religious group, if any, including whether the beneficiary identifies as not associating with a religion or religious group, tribal affiliation, primary language spoken, preferred communication method, sexual orientation, gender identity, preferred pronouns, marital status, parental status, highest degree of education attained, and income level. The VA already collects some of this information because it's necessary to qualify for veterans' health and healthcare benefits. Including it in this bill is redundant. Mandatory collection of the information is unprecedented. At best, it's a misguided imposition on privacy. At worst, it's left-wing social engineering on a massive scale. Rather than strengthen the veterans' personal relationships with their doctors, this legislation would interrogate them and place their most sensitive information in a mammoth database visible to virtually every VA employee. I do not impugn the author's motive, but I can have no doubt that this bill grew out of identity politics that pervade our country. Putting veterans on lists and dividing them into intersectional groups is not progress. It would be a terrible distraction. I oppose this legislation in the strongest terms. And Mr. Chair, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. Before we hear from our witnesses, I will now recognize Representative Mace for 5 minutes to deliver a statement in support of her legislation on HR 2326, the Veterans Cyber Risk Awareness Act.
Thank you, Mr.
Bruce.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, ranking member, for the opportunity to speak with you all today. And also, I want to thank you both for including HR 2326, the Veterans Cyber Risk Awareness Act, in today's legislative hearing. It's no secret that there are criminals looking to prey on unsuspecting internet users. Nowadays, it seems like everyone has the potential to be a victim of disinformation or identity theft or scams or fraud spread across the internet and even social media. It's pervasive everywhere. But despite these well-known threats, many individuals are not the proper knowledge to make informed decisions about what information they are consuming, clicking, or liking when they're online. In the past, there was a proposal that the VA should create an entirely new office to develop, promote, and disseminate information about cyber risks. And I think every panelist here will agree, the last thing the VA needs is another office. And the VA is certainly not the foremost expert in cybersecurity risks. That's why Ranking Member Bost and I introduced HR 2326. This bill would direct the VA's Office of Public and Intergovernmental Affairs to conduct communications and outreach campaigns to educate veterans about cybersecurity risks and do that in coordination with other cyber experts. The VA is well equipped to communicate with millions of veterans, but the department should rely on other federal agencies and private sector experts to provide the most up-to-date information about the risks that our veterans face when they are online. The majority launched an investigation into violent extremist groups and the possible targeted recruitment of veterans. When they did so, it was clear that we lacked crucial data to determine whether veterans are actually more vulnerable to cyber risks than other civilians or other groups of individuals. I'm very skeptical that veterans are somehow less capable of making informed decisions about online than their civilian peers. However, the only way to know that is for sure is to conduct a comprehensive study to better understand. That's why this legislation would also require an independent study on the vulnerability of veterans to cyber risks, resources to assist veterans in combating cyber risk, and the effectiveness of such an outreach campaign. The bill is supported by a number of veterans service organizations, including the Disabled American Veterans, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Student Veterans of America, Paralyzed Veterans of America, and the Wounded Warrior Project. Unfortunately, despite this overwhelming support, the majority blocked the bill at every turn until now, claiming they wanted to first finish this investigation. This, I believe, needlessly delayed some common sense and pragmatic policies included in this legislation, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to clear the logjam. And again, I want to thank the chairman and thank the ranking member for giving this bill its fair shot. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Mace. Before I move on, would any of the members of the subcommittee like to comment on any of the bills on the agenda today?
Mr. Chairman, Anthony Brown from Maryland.
Mr. Brown, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, the other members of the committee. I'm very excited about this first legislative hearing of the subcommittee. I want to thank our panelists for participating. And I wanted to speak to your proposed bill on data collection. I recognize that there may be disagreements on what type of data should be collected and how it should be organized, labeled, or even categorized. But I am speaking in support of the underlying intent of the VA Demographics Data Collection Improvement Act. And I look forward to working with you and all the members and the department so that we can get a good bill that works, collects the necessary data for the department, then to act on and make data-driven decisions, the best data-driven decisions. The VA needs to adopt a comprehensive data-driven approach to evaluating gaps in access to care and benefit usage. Without collecting demographic data, the VA is left relying on anecdotal evidence to inform their policies. And while the VA is already collecting some of that data, it's been well documented that it's less than well organized. We should recognize the efforts already underway at the VA to improve data collection. And I certainly applaud the Biden administration's commitment to advancing equity throughout the federal government. However, accurate demographic data collection on our veteran communities continues to be a challenge, complicating our efforts to effectively care for our veterans. For example, we know that certain populations and communities have a higher risk of specific health issues than other populations. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted many of the entrenched inequities that exist, particularly in communities of color. Black Americans are twice as likely to die from COVID-19 as white Americans and more likely to be infected and hospitalized from a virus. Additionally, African Americans are twice as likely to have a stroke and 4 times more likely to die of a stroke than white Americans. Black Americans also face higher risks of hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease. The veteran community is diverse, and we need to better understand the health implications of this diversity. The demographic data required by this bill will assist the department in seeing veterans as the diverse population that they are, allowing for more inclusive policies, better resource management, and more competent outreach. And this will give us the tools to accurately identify, diagnose, and treat the spectrum of health conditions affecting our veterans. The VA needs this data to know whether their programs are working, who they are supporting, and where gaps remain. So while I understand conversations around the specifics of this bill are ongoing, I support the underlying intent of this legislation and look forward to voting in favor of it. And let me just say before closing, Mr. Chairman, I got to say I'm a little bit disappointed with the comments of the ranking member. There may be disagreements on what we're doing, but to use characterizations like left-wing socialism, identity politics, those are Republican talking points. I think they really undermine the effort here. We cannot say on the one hand that we are a bipartisan committee working on behalf of our veterans, yet resort to partisan talking points. So I'm very concerned that at the outset of our legislative hearing, to hear that kind of language included. Nevertheless, I'm sure we can get beyond that, work together, and get some good products out on behalf of our veterans. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Brown. I would like to introduce our first panel from the Department of Veteran Affairs. Testifying before us this afternoon is Mr. Paul Brubaker, Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Office of the Information Technology. He is accompanied by Mr. Kashimandra Paul, Chief Data Officer and Executive Director of the Office of Data Governance and Analytics, Office of the Enterprise Integration. I will remind our witnesses to please pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that the recording will capture all of your words. And please remember to do so again when answering members' questions. Your written statement will be included in full in the hearing record without objection. Mr. Brubaker, I now recognize you for 5 minutes for VA remarks on the bill before us.
Chairman Mervin, Ranking Member Rosendale, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to present our views on several bills that would impact both the Department of Veterans Affairs and the veterans we're committed to serve as they relate to VA's management of information technology investments, including the electronic health record, cyber risk awareness, and veteran demographic data collection. Joining me today is Mr. Shamendra Paul, the VA's Chief Data Officer. At the outset, please allow me to express the department's appreciation for the productive engagement we've had with the committee and its staff regarding VA's concerns with certain provisions of these bills. We welcome this opportunity to share our remaining concerns and suggestions that we would like to submit for your consideration. First, as it relates to H.R. 2250, the Department of Veterans Affairs Information Technology Reform Act of 2021, we recommend changes to the legislative language and definitions to ensure consistency with existing law, regulation, and policy currently governing federal agency IT investment management. Specifically, the VA respectfully requests that the committee reconcile provisions of H.R. 2250 with current OMB regulatory guidance and definitions. This guidance represents IT investment management best practices across the federal government, and we recommend including these definitions in the bill so that they are consistent with OMB Circular A130 to include adopting OMB's definition and criteria for major information technology investment. The VA also recommends amending the project management certification language in Section 1701 so that it includes federal acquisition certification, program and project manager level 3 certification as a valid project manager certification. As you consider H.R. 2250, we also wanted the committee to be aware that the VA IT Investment Board, chaired by the CIO and co-chaired by the Chief Financial Officer and Chief Acquisition Officer, is charged with at least annually reviewing every IT program and project across the department as part of the department's IT capital planning and investment control process. The ITIB also recently adopted criteria requiring a more comprehensive annual review of any IT program that is designated as a major IT investment, as well as any IT program investment that exceeds $1 billion in life cycle cost or $200 million in annual cost for any year during the program. Second, I'd like to share our thoughts on H.R. 2326, the Veteran Cyber Risk Awareness Act that directs the Secretary to develop and conduct a communication and outreach program to educate veterans about cybersecurity risks. While we support the intent of the legislation, the VA is not currently positioned to deliver effective security awareness marketing to all veterans. More importantly, other federal agencies have specific mission taskings related to cybersecurity information and awareness and prevention. The Department of Homeland Security Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, leads the nation's strategic and unified work to strengthen the security, resilience, and workforce of the cyber ecosystem to protect critical services and individuals from cyber risks. We're concerned that H.R. 2326 would lead to VA operating outside of CISA's framework for establishing public awareness of cybersecurity risks and best practices, as well as having VA perform functions redundant to DHS's responsibility and authorities. VA believes the intent of the bill could best be met in coordination with CISA in delivering their message about cyber risks to veterans. Third, I would like to discuss H.R. 4591, VA Electronic Health Record Transparency Act of 2021. The department supports this bill if amended to address several concerns. Our primary concern is depending on when this legislation is passed, the initial 90-day reporting timeline may not allow sufficient time to complete EHRM's independent cost estimate that we're kicking off later this month. We anticipated once launched, this effort's going to take 12 months to complete. Lastly, we'd like to comment on the draft VA Demographic Data Collection Improvement Act. While VA certainly agrees that it has opportunities to strengthen data management and collection capabilities, we have concerns with the draft legislation as currently written. It remains unclear from the draft how collected data would be treated and or stored, and raises concerns related to HIPAA, the Privacy Act, and the Paperwork Reduction Act that we believe need to be addressed. The VA also has concerns that the 180-day timeline is insufficient for proper implementation and that the anticipated cost of compliance are not well understood. The department would likely only be able to comply with such legislation if sufficient funds were allocated. With these considerations in mind, we would respectfully request that the committee forego advancing this particular legislation until we can have further discussion. This concludes my statement, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you or other members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Brubaker. As we begin questions, I'll just remind my colleagues that members should pause 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that all of your questions are captured. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Brubaker, I'm glad to hear that VA supports this legislation. I look forward to working with all the stakeholders to ensure that it is implemented appropriately. In your testimony, you indicated that VA would have difficulty accounting for all costs associated with the EHRM program until the independent cost estimate is complete sometime next year. I find it concerning that 3 years into a $16 billion program, VA is unable to account for actual expenses related to the project. Can you explain to me why VA feels it would take so long to accurately account for these costs?
Yes, sir. I appreciate the question. I think this relates to the IG findings in the 2 reports that were issued earlier this year, which you're very well acquainted with. The issue that we had initially is that we weren't capturing all of the costs according to what would be a standard life cycle cost estimate definition. We were only looking at those that were specifically related to deploying the EHRM technology. What we have to do is we've got to understand the end-to-end costs and all the additional support costs that go into the definition of crafting an independent cost estimate, as well as a life cycle cost estimate. The definition of life cycle cost estimate includes all funding, regardless of sources, necessary for implementation of the program. I think you're aware of those definitions as well. We simply, when that first cost estimate was scoped, it wasn't scoped adequately. What we've done is we've consulted a number of experts as a result of those IG reports and contracted with an FFRDC, the Institute for Defense Analysis, to make sure that once and for all, we actually capture all of these end-to-end costs and can present them to the committee as requested.
Mr. Brubaker, as I have said before, I understand that the infrastructure costs of HR 4591 seeks to have included in the reporting for EHRM and not driven solely by EHRM project. These infrastructure upgrades are a product of years worth of deferred infrastructure upgrades. Can you tell me how much of the expected $16 billion budget was allocated for infrastructure upgrades?
Yes, sir. I'll have to get back to you with that specific number on the infrastructure upgrade, but this also speaks to the issue with the independent cost estimate, where we have to decide on exactly what the cost allocation model would be for infrastructure upgrades and how much would actually be attributed to the EHRM program. We've begun asking the question, but for EHRM, would we have to upgrade elements of the infrastructure? It's clear that there will be a lot of additional benefits that will be derived from upgrading the infrastructure and having EHRM pay for elements of that. But we have to make sure that we've got a very defensible cost attribution model, and IDA is charged with coming up with that.
Given that infrastructure upgrades needs are not entirely driven by EHRM, how does VA intend to report those costs transparently so that they are not considered a project overrun?
Yes, sir. I appreciate that question as well. It's all in the accounting and how we once we decide on what is going to be attributed to the EHRM program, it's going to make us, it will enable us to give you a much more higher reliable number with much greater fidelity on the non-OEHRM or non-EHRM attributable costs for things like infrastructure readiness, like the infrastructure readiness program. We actually do have figures associated with that as well as we develop and rationalize those investments into the IRP portfolio. We'll be able to give you the breakdown of the costs that's associated with EHRM, and that's which is non-EHRM related for upgrading our infrastructure.
On the data bill, Mr. Brubaker, the Demographic Data Collection Improvement Act is an important piece of legislation. The number of times VA has been unable to provide specific data to Congress because, as witnesses have stated, we don't collect that data is concerning. I'm heartened to hear that you agree that VA's data needs work, and I look forward to working with the VA to ensure that the final bill text is workable and, most importantly, improves patient care and access to benefit our veterans. In your testimony, you mentioned VA profile as a data storage location for demographic data. It is my understanding that VA profile is a VHA system. Can you describe to me what access other VA service lines have to the data in VA profile?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I'll defer to our Chief Data Officer to respond to that question.
Thank you for the question. VA profile originated as a VHA system, but it's an enterprise system now. It is our core system for authoritative use of collection, storage, and use of demographic and contact information. It's where we bring in data from DoD, for example, as we follow the service member into the veteran's journey. We have a lot of opportunities to improve the quality, timeliness, utility of the data, but we think that's really the focus we need to place, and we look forward to working with the committee to strengthen focus on reinforcing VA profile. Also, we have a predictive analytics data set called US Vets that has more comprehensive data on all veterans, and as part of our VA data strategy, we're looking at opportunities to improve the management, timeliness, quality, and secure use of that data, both to support operational improvements, service, and benefits for veterans, and evidence-based policymaking, sir.
Thank you. At this time, I yield back my time. Mr. Rosendale, you are recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Mr. Brubaker, the VA's position is the VA's position that collecting personal information from veterans when the information is not required to qualify them for a program, should it be voluntary or compulsory?
I will defer to our Chief Data Officer to reply to that, Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. We strongly believe in the data that we hold it in trust for veterans. We've recently published the principles for ethical use and sharing of veteran information. It's the highest value at VA is to protect that information and only use it to support veterans. So we don't, and we also have legal responsibilities through the Paperwork Reduction Act, the Information Quality Act, the evidence-based.
I understand. I'm only had 5 minutes here, so I don't want to be rude, but I want to get straight to the heart of this thing. I understand that you're going to do your very best to protect this information. Granted, I understand you will attempt to do so if information in order to qualify for some benefit, okay? Should that information be compulsory or voluntary to turn in?
We only collect the information we need to adjudicate benefits or provide services. We don't collect additional information that's not needed in those transactions. Now, more broadly, okay.
So let me go on that. If I was, as an employer to request the exact same information that is on that list that I just stipulated, I would be subject to a lawsuit. And I think everyone who is on this hearing right now would certainly agree to that. I would be subject to a lawsuit. We haven't had your testimony yet, but the Demographic Data Collection Improvement Act, as I understand, proposes issues with HIPAA and the Privacy Act. Can you explain to me how we're going to?
I'm sorry, Congressman, the transmission was a little garbled, but I think I got the essence of your question. What I would tell you and the committee is that our view is that we already have much, if not most, of the information in the demographic data collection bill. So in working with the committee and with staff, we want to have further discussion to strengthen the implementation roadmap for the VA data strategy to focus on better using what we already have, right, to meet the intent of the bill. We do think it's important for VA to really understand the veterans we're serving, those in front of us, and the entire population. And the demographic information is critical to that. But the bottom line is we have much, if not most, of that data, and it's incumbent upon us at VA to improve our management, integration, the quality of that data, and to securely and ethically put it to use to serve veterans individually and as a population.
All right, I'm going to switch back to Mr. Brubaker. Mr. Brubaker, if a veteran chooses to provide this information, which is basically what Mr. Paul, I think, is getting at, that many of them provide that information voluntarily right now on race, ethnicity, religion, tribal affiliation, sexual orientation, or educational background for health purposes. Are they able to voluntarily provide that information now?
Sir, I'm not sure I know the answer to that question off the top of my head, and I don't want to speculate. I'll get you a response for the record.
Okay.
Well, what comes to mind are things like the Million Veteran Program, where folks volunteer to participate, and we collect and analyze a whole plethora of data. That is voluntary. So I definitely want to. It's a nuanced answer, and I want to be precise when I get back to you.
All right, let's move on to something else. The Electronic Health Record Transparency Act is on the agenda today because, frankly, we can't trust the VA to tell the truth about the program's finances. In early July, when the report from the strategic review was overdue, the secretary warned of dire consequences if the Appropriations Committee did not release the remaining quarter of the funding. Then we find out a few weeks ago that none of the money was even spent. I know you don't manage the program, but how can the VA ask for more money year after year while behaving so carelessly and, quite frankly, deceitful?
Yes, sir. I appreciate the question, and I will. I think I'm going to deliver some good news to you in the department's commitment to getting much better fidelity over IT management program spending. It's one of the reasons why we stood up the IT Investment Review Board here at the department. That review board, the ITIB and the IT Investment Board, in its short life, has already established a number of significant criteria designed to get all of us much improved fidelity over cost estimates of any program, any IT program managed by the department. We're requiring life cycle cost estimates for any standard investment. Again, that's one of the reasons why we recommended going back to the OMB definitions, because I think they provide some pretty good guidance on how we're supposed to be developing the cost schedule and performance data and baselining that, which you referenced in your opening statement. That comment was near and dear to us because we're building the IT investment management processes and the governance in order to get you that level of fidelity, baseline fidelity, that will drive transparency and accountability. And I think that's what we're all after here.
There's only one round.
Thank you for your answer. Mr. Chair, I see that we're well over my time. I would yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. At this time, I'd like to recognize Chairman Takano for 5 minutes. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Mervan. Let me just begin by saying I would like to start by saying that I'm happy to be co-sponsoring Chairman Mervan's bipartisan EHRM Accountability Transparency Act. And I think VA's support of providing Congress with accurate cost estimates is a great first step in making progress with this program. For Mr. Brubaker, the EHRM Accounting Transparency Act resulted from a pair of reports from VA's Office of the Inspector General. These reports raised major concerns about the validity of VA's current life cycle cost estimate and highlight the fact that VA is charging aspects of the EHR program to other budgets. Can you please describe the work that VA is currently doing? Well, actually, you already answered that question with Chairman with the gentleman from Montana. Let me just say that I'm happy that VA is taking that the VA leadership is taking the cost estimate seriously, and that you're doing work along those lines. And I know this bill will be complementary to the work that has already started as a result of the strategic review. And I appreciated the answer you gave to Mr. Rosendale. Now, regarding the data bill, while I appreciate that the testimony that VA has provided on the difficulties surrounding data management and collection capabilities, I'd like to emphasize that this legislation is still in draft form and that we are going to work with you. We're going to continue to work with you to make sure that this effort complies with all current laws and regulations. And Mr. Rosendale has raised some important points about privacy, and we want to make sure that that we're fully in accord with HIPAA. My concern with your testimony, however, is that I am sure that the VSO witnesses, and I'm also sure that the VSO witnesses share the concern I have, is the lack of emphasis you've shown on trying to accurately account for the veterans that you're serving. I understand the text of the bill references storage of information on IT systems at VA, but you are missing the human element that makes this draft bill important. We are here to serve all veterans, not some veterans, all of them. And if we're not collecting the types of information that gives VA a better sense of who they need to serve, then we aren't doing our jobs. So I realize that change is hard, and I appreciate that this will be a challenge, but I want to offer you the opportunity to state to the committee your commitment to make sure that we are accounting for all veterans.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. And I'm going to just make a couple of observation comments and make you aware of some operating philosophies that we're now following before I throw it over to the Chief Data Officer to respond to some specifics. I will assure you that the Secretary has a really focused commitment on approaching our veteran population with human-centered design in mind. And by that, I mean approaching any technology, any front-end interaction with the department with a large degree of empathy, of understanding. We're opening our ears and we're really listening to what the veteran community, the veteran population is telling us. And we are doing our best to craft systems that will respond to how they interact and how they want to interact with the department, vice how the department may want to interact with them. We're really trying to come at it from their perspective. And, you know, there is demographic data that's really, really important for us to analyze, to collect and analyze so we can better serve that veteran population. And with that, I'll turn it over to the CDO.
Thank you, Paul. Chairman, thank you for the question. And I do want to unequivocally state that we support the intent of the demographic data collection bill. Has been communicated to us, and the bill is in draft, has been communicated to us. The intent is to better serve veterans that come to VA and make the choice and understand the entire veteran population so that we can understand and act on gaps. And we fully support that intent. You know, we highlighted earlier in some of the back and forth a VA profile, a current operational system that we use as the core of demographic information, contact information for veterans we serve. We have an additional effort, something called US Vets, which is a predictive analytic data set over the entire veteran population. We're informing US Vets from data from the Census Department, DOD, other agencies, other data sources. And we're focused on improving, you know, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access in our data, improving the quality of our data so that we're making the best possible decisions for individual veterans and for the population as a whole.
Well, I appreciate an answer, and let me just say that this is the intention is not to divide veterans, and that you know, leaving any veteran out is also not within the spirit of serving all veterans. And to not leave veterans out, we need to know who they are, and to assume that all veterans are alike or of one particular group, even if that group may be predominant, is disrespectful to those that come from different walks of life. One of the great things about our military is that people from all different backgrounds, and including sexual orientations and gender identities, have served in our military, have shed blood for our country, and they are deserving no less respect. And that includes designing ways within our data processes and our data collection to make sure that we accord them that respect. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. At this time, I'd like to recognize Rep. Banks for 5 minutes. Representative Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's stick with that topic, Mr. Paul. I understand you might support the intent of the bill, but at the same time, the VA has significant concerns about the draft bill, as I do as well as a veteran myself. Frankly, I find it unbelievable that the VA would compel veterans to report their religion and create a database of that type of information. The law has prohibited the census from doing exactly that since 1976. So, Mr. Paul, do you agree that this policy has serious First Amendment and religious liberty implications?
And to my understanding, we get religious affiliation from the Department of Defense, service member and separation information. We've had it authoritative in electronics since 2015, and we're working to improve that quality. It's used primarily for memorial affairs. We collect information in the course of administering our services and benefits, and we collect the information that is needed to administer those services and benefits. We don't ask for additional information. That's against policy. It's against current law. There is voluntary collections, as Mr. Brubaker highlighted. The Million Vet Program is a premier example, but I don't think we collect religious affiliation through that example, and I'm not aware of other collections of that kind of information.
So you would oppose this bill because it does that?
We support the intent of the bill, and we want to work with the committee to tailor the bill. And in particular, as we're finalizing the implementation roadmap of the VA data strategy, we want to work through the details. As I stated previously, we have much, if not most, of the information in current collections through the course of delivering our services and benefits. We need to focus on improving the quality and management of that information and the ethical and secure use of that information for operational reasons and for analytics to drive evidence-based policymaking.
But just to be clear, I understand you support the intent of the bill, but you oppose any effort as this bill, the language in this bill that would compel veterans, force veterans to report their religion. You oppose that part of the bill.
VA doesn't.
It sounds like you already have that information available to you. So you oppose that part of this bill, which has serious First Amendment and religious liberty implications, because it would compel veterans to and force them to report their religion.
We're focused on improving the quality, integration, and management of our data to support veterans. We're not in the business of collecting information that we're not using to support in the moment service and benefit delivery.
So you, yes or no question, you would prefer that language be removed from this bill?
Yeah, I look forward to working with you, sir, and the committee to strengthen the bill and to be able to bring these ideas forward.
I think I'll take that as a yes, that you do oppose that part of the bill. Mr. Brubaker, I'm glad to see that the VA supports the Ehrm Transparency Act. As you know, OIG demonstrated that VA failed to report all of its infrastructure costs for the program. Do you commit to reporting expenditures accurately and completely if this legislation is enacted?
Representative Banks, appreciate the question. We will report and forward to the committee the data that we receive as a result of the independent cost estimate, which should offer much higher fidelity analysis than we had previously performed. We listened to the IG report and took it to heart and realized that we needed to look at the end-to-end cost of this particular program and provide all of our stakeholders with data, and even the management of the department with the data necessary to really understand the overall cost of the program.
That's all I got. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Brown for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brubaker, I know that you're familiar with the Executive Order 13985, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. I think it's in your written testimony. Is the VA represented on the equitable data working group that was established in that executive order?
Representative Brown, I will turn that over to the Chief Data Officer since he has primary responsibility.
Thank you.
Congressman, the answer is yes. We are a part of the interagency task force described in that executive order.
Thank you. In section 9 of that executive order, it reads, many federal data sets are not disaggregated by race, ethnicity, gender, disability, income, veteran status, or other key demographic variables. This lack of data has cascading effects and impedes efforts to measure and advance equity. A first step to promoting equity in government action is to gather the data necessary to inform that effort. Mr. Paul, I know you didn't draft the executive order, but as I read section 9 and its assessment of federal data sets and the importance of getting it right, does it sound like section 9 applies to the VA?
What you're highlighting in section 9 is a well understood challenge across the federal government, and VA has challenges in that area. Those are things that we're constantly working to improve. But yes, I would say yes.
Good. Let me just conclude, Mr. Chairman, by saying it is very refreshing for the VA to come in today and to clearly state that you support the intent of this data collection bill. You're identifying, I think, appropriately the challenges, the details necessary to move this bill to into a posture where the president can sign it, and it will give you greater tools and perhaps authorities to collect data, analyze the data, and then equitably deliver programs and services for our veterans. So certainly look forward to working with the department. We don't want to have any unnecessary HIPAA violations. We don't want any unnecessary encroachments on freedom of religion or expression. I think everybody on this committee can agree that we can accomplish both. We can strike the right balance, collecting the data in an appropriate way where veterans feel as if they're respected, where we respect their dignity, as well as their service, and where they appreciate and understand that the information is being collected to better serve them, and them being the very diverse community of veterans. So again, exceedingly refreshing to hear the department coming in and supporting the intent of the bill and making a commitment to working with the committee to ensure that we get it right. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Brown. At this time, I recognize myself for 5 more minutes. For Mr. Brubaker, could VA Profile or the Master Veteran Index be integrated with the VA systems to serve as a single point of truth when it comes to information about veterans, similar to what DEERS is for the DoD?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. And I will throw it over to Shemendra again. But before we do, I think that's certainly the intent is to ensure that all of our systems are informed with authoritative data. Yeah, similar to Deers Rapids, and I'm familiar with that because I was formerly the deputy CIO of the Defense Department, what seems like back in the Lincoln administration. But I think that is absolutely the intent, is to make sure that we have authoritative data sources informing our systems and our workflows. So over to you, Shemendra.
Thank you, Paul. Chairman, the answer is yes, absolutely. That is the intent. That is the desire, is for us to position VA Profile as the authoritative central hub within VA across all the administrations, all the programs, so that whenever VA serves a veteran, we take advantage of what we know about that veteran and don't ask for information we already have, and we can embed that knowledge of the veteran that's reflected in VA Profile in our services and a service delivery. Yes, sir.
If I may, I have a staff member who is a veteran who had never heard of VA Profile before meeting with you recently. I've been told that it's difficult to find, and once found, the data in it was outdated. How is VA communicating with veterans about VA profile? And then my second question, how could VA maximize the use of VA profile to improve the collection of demographic data related to veterans?
Yes, sir. So it's an internal system. So it's not veteran facing, it's internal. We have a desire, this goes to some of the things that Mr. Brubaker talked about earlier with human-centered design through va.gov as a single portal, right, to be able to give the veterans the opportunity to better see the information we have and improve things like, for example, contact information, which is currently managed in individual programs. That's a pretty big evolution because right now, all of our programs are driven by regulations and workflows, and veterans are used to dealing with us through those, and evolving to where they're managing contact information, for example, or things like that through VA profile is a fairly major evolution. But that's the kind of thing that we're looking to bake into our implementation roadmap for the VA data strategy. The Secretary previously announced the data strategy in front of the full committee earlier this year, and we've committed to delivering that strategy in a timeline implementation roadmap by the end of the calendar year. So, and we'd love to follow up with the staffer that you highlighted to talk about and demo what VA profile and also some of our analytic systems, because we want to be able to look at data not only for veterans we serve, but the entire veteran population, which we have the public trust mission to work with and be able to have that data integrated and accessible for serving veterans and for evidence-based policymaking.
Thank you very much. What I wanted to make sure that I talk about is just say that the intent of the bill is to make sure that as a national security issue, we continue to attract the most diversified, most qualified, most intelligent service members that we possibly can. And on the VA side, making it absolutely positively a mission to provide a world-class healthcare system to all individuals who participate in the armed services. That being said, the data collection allows us to enhance our analytics so that we could best serve those individuals medically and with benefits. That being said, I'd like to yield back my time and ask if any other members have any questions at this time.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rosendale, yes.
Could I ask one last question, please?
Yes, Mr. Rosendale is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Paul, this is for you. The draft bill requires that each veteran's record established or maintained by the VA, including Veterans Health Administration, the Veterans Benefits Administration, and the National Cemetery Administration, be updated to include the information listed in the bill. How could the VA possibly gather all of that information and then guarantee security of all that personal information in all of those combined systems? When I now look at what we're trying to achieve with the EHRM and the literally billions of dollars that have been invested, and we don't even have a functioning system, okay? And this has been going on for several years now. How in the world are we going to combine those three massive programs, gather that data, collect this data, which we still have questions about, the legality of it, and then be able to, again, gather it, put it into place, and then guarantee the security of it? Please explain that to me.
Yes, sir. I appreciate the question. The security of the data is incredibly important, and I'll ask Mr. Brubaker to talk about the cybersecurity program at the department. What we're looking at here in particular for this bill is demographic data. We already have much of the data, if not most of the data, in our systems, our IT systems across the department. And what we're talking about is the ability to take data that we already have, that we've already collected, and ethically, within law, within policy, manage it and use it again to better serve veterans. So, we're not supportive of a blanket collection of all this data in every program and every interaction. What we're asking is to work with the committee to better leverage and manage the data we already collect incidental to delivering services and benefits to veterans, to better support those veterans, and then to be able to use it to shape policy for the department and better veteran outcomes.
But this bill does, Mr. Paul, take a step further and say, we're going to collect this additional data. It doesn't say we're going to manage this data as we already have it collected. That may have been voluntarily turned in by the veterans. It says this shall be mandatory information that we are going to collect. Am I wrong?
We're hoping to work through those issues with the committee, sir, so that we bring it in line with what we've been talking about today. And I'd love to ask Mr. Brubaker to talk about the cybersecurity aspects of your question.
Yes, sir. Representative Rosendale, I'm pleased to report that the department is about to issue its VA cybersecurity strategy that will specifically address a number of the strategies, a number of the approaches that we're currently using, and we have planned to use to just maintain vigilance over veteran data as we have it. The one deep responsibility we have is protecting personally identifiable information of our nation's veterans that has been entrusted to the department. We take that responsibility incredibly seriously. We've invested a lot of resources into ensuring that we've got a robust and very effective cybersecurity architecture. Now, I hesitate to get into any more detail because I certainly don't want to make us a target or challenge those who would like to attack our systems, but I'm reasonably confident that we have a very risk-based, defense in-depth strategy that will help us protect the personal identifiable information that the veterans have entrusted to this department.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. Any other member with any questions? At this time, if there are no other further questions, I want to thank the VA for their testimony today and for answering our questions. That concludes our first panel. Panel number 2, we are so pleased to have representatives from 3 veteran service organizations with us today. Your insights on these pieces of legislation are invaluable. We also thank you for your ongoing work to support our nation's veterans and our nation. Our witnesses are Mr. Patrick Murray, Legislative Director at Veterans of Foreign Wars, Ms. Jennifer Dain, Executive Director for the Modern Military Association of America, and Lindsay Church, Executive Director for the Minority Veterans of America. I will remind our witnesses to please pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that the recording will capture all of your words, and please remember to do so again when answering members' questions. Your written statements will be included in full in the hearing record without objection. I would like to recognize Mr. Murray from the VFW. Mr. Murray, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Mervan, Ranking Member Rosendale, Chairman Takano, members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the men and women of the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States and its auxiliary, thank you for the opportunity to provide remarks on legislation pending before this subcommittee. The VFW supports the proposal to identify and collect certain demographic data of veterans utilizing VA care and benefits. The VFW believes detailed data collection and transparency of which specific veterans are affected by which specific issues will help determine how we should focus resources and attention in the future. Last month, VA published its 2021 National Veteran Suicide Prevention Annual Report. The report acknowledged progress, identifying areas where the most recent picture of veteran suicide demonstrated statistical improvement. Though this should be lauded as a positive step, the VFW remains concerned that we do not have the complete picture of how this change occurred. The report continues to only identify veterans who either engaged with the VHA within the past year or veterans who did not, which in our opinion is simply not enough. For years, the VFW has insisted that VA must stop viewing suicide simply as a mental health crisis and instead seek to better understand the underlying causes. While VA has done some research in this regard, the annual report continues to ignore the full scope of engagement that veterans have with all of VA, which could include programs under the purview of VBA as well. The report in its current form does not capture social determinants of health, which VA research indicates are often better predictors of suicide or suicidal ideation. Many VBA programs like disability compensation, GI Bill, or home loan guarantee are facets of critical social determinants of health, such as steady income, workforce skill attainment, and stable housing. The VFW believes that VA has significant data regarding these recipients of these benefit programs, and that it should be easy to able to cross-reference this information in its report. We believe this proposal would help collect and identify important demographic data that will help shape the paths forward in suicide prevention efforts. Having a better understanding of the veteran population utilizing VA care and benefits will help better inform how and where to direct resources. As the population of minority veterans continues to grow, VA needs to adapt to meet the needs to access both benefits and healthcare services. Women, LGBT, and racial and ethnic minority veterans face barriers and challenges across different life domains. In 2014, less than a quarter of the total veteran population were minorities. This number is expected to increase to 35.7% by 2040. The VFW supports this draft proposal and has a suggestion to make an improvement. HR 5295, Every Veteran Counts Act of 2021, seeks to collect data regarding the entire veteran population with other federal agencies. This proposal seeks to collect data regarding veterans only utilizing VA. We believe these two efforts should be combined to gain a full understanding of those veterans using VA and those who are not. With this information, we can begin to identify gaps in care and focus resources toward those veterans who may need it most. The VFW supports the other three proposals presented here today. HR 2326 would help combat the rise of misinformation and hopefully protect veterans from entities that seek to prey upon them in the digital space. HR 2250 would help implement a new model for IT development and implementation for certain large IT projects, creating a detailed outline of the funding required and prioritizing each project will help make VA's IT efforts more transparent. And HR 4591 would require VA to produce reports on the overall costs of implementing the EHR. In recent reports by the OIG, there were significant costs that were underreported, unreported, or unknown. This misidentification of infrastructure needs could jeopardize the overall success of the modernization program. The VFW hopes this proposal will force VA to fully identify all the hurdles to accomplish this much needed health record upgrade. The VFW also believes once all these issues are identified, VA must develop a detailed funding and work request to eliminate all remaining barriers for project completion. Chairman Mervan, Ranking Member Rosendale, this concludes my statement. I'm prepared to answer any questions you or the other subcommittee members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Murray, for your comments. At this time, I'd like to recognize Ms. Jennifer Dain, Executive Director for the Modern Military Association of America.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Moran, Ranking Members Rosendale, and the House Committee on Veteran Affairs. My name is Jennifer Dain. I'm an Air Force veteran and the Executive Director of the Modern Military Association of America, which is the nation's largest LGBTQ plus military and veteran nonprofit. We have about 85,000 members and supporters, and we're very much appreciate the opportunity to speak today. The Modern Military Association of America supports all the bills that were presented today, but specifically looking at the Department of Veteran Affairs Demographic Data Collection Improvement Act in its draft form. As the nation's largest health records management system for the LGBTQ community, the VA's Modernization and Transparency Acts are very crucial. We want to make sure that we specifically emphasize the Department of Defense's demographic data collection. Just to assess the concerns of Mr. Rosendale, this is not a bill on identity politics. As a person who uses the VA system as her own personal health care, I would love to be counted and supported as an LGBTQ veteran. This bill specifically is looking at the cost benefit analysis can potentially save medical expenditures of the VA over $230 billion and promote costs that lead to death by over $1 billion. For our specific population, we assess that there's about 1 million LGBTQ veterans. However, VHA has, although we assess that number, the VHA's ability to assess the accurate and exact number of LGBTQ veterans is limited by a system level. The urgency to collect data that's accurate and on these minority populations, specifically to ours, is essential. And this resolution is simply more than just a data collection bill, but it's a life-saving bill that similar to what Chairman Takano said in his. It goes beyond that. It's a human-centered bill. Despite the lack of data for LGBTQ veteran populations, there are startling statistical revelations that are found within the research and literature that are well-grounded in our human-centered design. Compared to the general population, LGBTQ veterans are at significantly higher risks for mental health concerns. Previous policies like Don't Ask, Don't Tell that were in place from 1993 to 2011 promoted those discriminatory practices that are still occurring in our veteran populations today and have so many rippling effects even to today. We know that veterans that are LGBTQ have a higher propensity for substance abuse, STIs, including HIV, intimate partner violence, and suicidality. Furthermore, with the growing support of these systematic efforts within the VA and within the VA system, we know that there's much improvement needed for the LGBTQ veteran experiences. Despite progress, however, LGBTQ individuals continue to experience worse healthcare outcomes than their heterosexual and cisgender counterparts. For instance, 36% of LGBTQ plus veterans view the VA hospital as somewhat or very unwelcoming. But furthermore, what this bill does is economically, it changes economics. The VA has prioritized the modernization of the EHR throughout its partnership with Cerner. And to date, Cerner has been implemented in 17 states, 47 commands, 1,000 locations, 64,000 system users, and approximately 2.7 billion eligible beneficiaries. They just also went into the Coast Guard and had a successful implementation. With this implementation, what this means to our veterans is more relevant information can be collected, especially for sexual orientation, gender identity, and biological sex. The VA system is supposed to serve and care for all veterans. And in doing so, they must care for all. As a user myself, I would love to have the most accurate healthcare that's representative of my population. Data collected would ensure that we receive clinical options for specialty care, especially for our biological sex. It would promote accurate preventative screenings and care. This would ensure accurate care for referrals for all veterans and those who seek to make sure that they are counted. Name and gender marker changes and other issues related to PPIs are managed by the privacy officers, which would ensure that compliance and record keeping regulations are in the maintenance of that. So as the largest healthcare provider of LGBTQ veterans, we strongly urge that that all bills, but specifically the Demographic Data Collection Improvement Act of 2021 be highly considered and modified so we can progress. And thank you for having us today. And I'm open and open for questions from the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Dain. Finally, I would like to recognize Lindsay Church for Minority Veterans of America's testimony. Lindsay Church, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Mervan and Takano, Ranking Member Rosendale, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm Lindsay Church, and I'm proud to serve as the Executive Director and co-founder of Minority Veterans of America. Our organization works to create belonging and advance equity for our nation's most marginalized and historically underserved veterans, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ, women, and religious and non-religious minorities. We have the honor of representing more than 10.2 million minority veterans and directly serving thousands of members across the country and world. Thank you for allowing me to contribute to this hearing. On today's agenda are several bills that will improve the Department of Veterans Affairs' ability to provide accessible and supportive services to all the veterans in its charge. Our written testimony reflects our positions and inputs on each of the bills before you. We would like to focus our opening on two. We fully support the discussion draft Department of Veterans Affairs Demographic Data Collection Improvement Act of 2021. We're especially grateful for the inclusion of American Indian and Alaska Native tribal affiliation, sexual orientation, gender identity, and pronouns. The collection of this information will improve patient experiences and deepen our understanding of the changing veteran population. For too long, advocates have relied on incomplete or dated demographic analyses and representative samples to understand even the most fundamental information, like how many LGBTQ veterans there are. We recommend that collection of specific demographic data have the option to quote, to prefer not to say or provide no answer, as well as, in some instances, providing options for self-described language. Failure to collect comprehensive demographic data about VA patrons puts the department at a disadvantage to fully understanding the greatest crises in our community and has contributed to deep health disparities and inequitable outcomes for minority veterans. A few examples of these disparities include suicide. Research indicates that both Indigenous and LGBTQ communities experience greater instances of suicidal ideation and are at greater risk for suicide. The LGBTQ community is 2 to 3 times more likely to experience suicidal ideation and 2 to 7 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual counterparts. For those with gender dysphoria, the rate of suicide attempts jumps to 20 times more likely. VA's own annual suicide prevention report indicated that greater complexity of analysis is needed on Indigenous and LGBTQ populations. Housing instability. Indigenous individuals are overrepresented among those experiencing homelessness, representing just 1% of the total population, but 5% of those experiencing homelessness. LGBTQ veterans are twice as likely to have housing instability indicators than their dominant culture counterparts. Substance use disorder. Studies on substance use among Indigenous veterans are decades old, despite the fact that compared to other racial ethnic minority groups in the US, American Indians and Alaskan Natives have the highest rates of alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, and hallucinogen use disorders. Billions have been invested into solutions to each of these crises with often negligible impact on the problem. As the ranking member mentioned, collection of this data is unprecedented. We have the ability to, we have been abiding by precedented practices for decades. We must do better and take unprecedented steps to better serve our veteran communities and should not be viewed as a shocking or interrogated tactic. This information is crucial to helping us create nuanced solutions that serve the 21st century veteran. This committee, the department, advocates, and veterans themselves need this information and data so that VA can provide the best care possible to each and every veteran, regardless of their identity. We are also supportive of HR 2326, the Veterans Cybersecurity or Cyber Risk Awareness Act, and appreciate efforts to educate veterans about cybersecurity risks. We're particularly supportive of the inclusion of disinformation in the definition of cyber risks. Disinformation campaigns reduce the veteran community's faith in the department and in medical and mental health interventions that can potentially be life-saving. Studies indicate that among internet users, women's social media accounts are more likely to be hacked, and racial and ethnic minorities are more likely to have their identities stolen, and they're the most likely to be financially devastated by cybercrime. As minority veterans begin and continue to access VA benefits and services, safe and reliable access to telehealth options for many modalities of care is critical to the delivery of these benefits and services. Education campaigns that serve veterans currently impacted by cybersecurity risks and research to better understand the issues and impacts of those risks are necessary to ensure veterans can safely access care. We recommend that information be equipped to assist sight and hearing impaired populations, and that materials be tailored in language and content for minority identities and orientations who are at greater risk of cyber crimes. The input we've provided echo the experiences of many minority veterans who have been historically excluded or underserved by the Department of Veterans Affairs. We believe that the legislation before this body today is a long overdue recognition that every veteran, no matter their identity, counts and their outcomes matter. We thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in your offices.
Thank you, Lindsay. Before I proceed to questions, a reminder to all members and colleagues, should you pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that all of your questions are captured. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. First, thank you all for participation in our first legislative hearing today. Getting the perspective of veteran service organization on this legislation is extremely important to me and will seriously consider your comments and testimony today as we continue to work towards making these laws. Mr. Murray, from your perspective as a veteran, can you speak to how important the success and accurate accounting for EHRM program is to you and other veterans?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the question. The EHRM is a very needed, long overdue upgrade. I got out in only 2007, but I still have about 12 inches of paperwork when I got out. That was still we're in the 21st century, it's 2021. We need electronic health records. This is a project that must go through and must be completed successfully. If there are roadblocks in the place, simple IT closet, simple cabling issues, electrical issues, things that will get in the way of the proper success of the project, we have to eliminate those barriers and roadblocks right away. The EHR is a critical tool that will help veterans, and making sure that there are no infrastructure roadblocks is very important.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Ms. Dain, I would like to ask you the same question, please.
Yes, the electronic health records management system, like Mr. Murray said, I mean, I got out and I think we had 400 pages and it was on a disk. I had to actually take that to the VA and scan it in before I could even give it to them. So the transition from, the DOD to the VA is so incredibly critical. I even had medical records from a military sexual assault that were destroyed in a case because they were not put in an electronic records management system. So those were critical to my disability rating and other healthcare that the disparities that impacted me. So whenever we look at Cerner's implementation, they are far beyond doing what they need to do. It's the VA that needs to make sure that they are accurately, putting in the system and that everyone knows how Cerner is implementing it. And for especially these demographic information, we already have these. Cerner did a really great job of implementing all of these records. We have the accessibility to use these. It's just telling the VA exactly how to use this data, how to do it correctly. And without having to go through the charts and having to look at them, there are databases that we can collect usable research that only creates, trauma-informed care and affirmative care for all veterans, and that's in any space, and allowing them to have the ability to get the best care possible, because that is exactly what the VA is there for. So we really affirm the EHR, the implementation, and we are seeing the successes on both sides of the VA and Cerner in the Cerner Corporation as they look and implement those.
Thank you, Ms. Dain. Lindsay, is there anything you would like to add from your perspective at MVA?
I think most of what is important was covered, but that seamless transition from service to veteran status is important for health outcomes. Oftentimes, if you are, I have boxes of medical records. I was hospitalized for a very long time. I was given 4 bank boxes of records, and the VA doesn't want to scan this. So I had to kind of capture everything that was most important, which means that things are left out. So that seamless transition is really important to ensuring the health outcomes of veterans once they transition out of DoD is best managed and that those folks are cared for. We also want to make sure that the budgets and analyses are accurate, and as those financial impacts do impact the overall ability for us to enact other changes that are cost prohibitive.
Lindsay, on the data bill, can you please explain to the subcommittee why collection of veterans' information is important to providing them care and access to benefits?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Chairman. So on the baseline level, the human dignity is the individual's experience at the VA. I know for myself, I identify as a non-binary, and they use they, them pronouns. I have to come out to every single provider that I have and tell them that I'm non-binary and tell them that I use they, them pronouns. This shouldn't be a thing. I should be able to tell one person and that my pronouns are reflected by every provider that I have. And on a larger perspective and the systems perspective, you're looking at health equity issues. But the longer that we hold out in collecting this information, the longer we're going to be grasping at straws, trying to find these solutions as we're trying to mitigate suicide, mental health, homelessness, substance use. All of these things are going to require a unique and nuanced approach to the solutions that we create. Without that information, we're throwing spaghetti at a wall. We're not getting the answers that we truly need.
Ms. Dain, same question.
I want to echo Lindsay's responses because we do know that, we have there's an assessment of over 1 million LGBTQ plus veterans. However, we assess that there's probably about 2.5, but because there has been no data collected because of policies like Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and other discriminatory policies in the past, we don't know those numbers. And we have to rely on census data from years ago and an administration that's willing to collect the information on LGBTQ individuals to, in fact, show us the population. So really looking at, affirmative care for all veterans, we have to make sure that these are included in those. And if I want to be included, if I want to identify as LGBTQ, I would like that to be placed in my record. Also my pronouns as well, very similar to what Lindsay stated as well. Just basically, looking at the literature, the health literature, and health disparities, we have to consider that whenever we're looking at one of the largest medical healthcare systems for LGBTQ individuals in the United States.
Thank you, Ms. Dain. Mr. Murray, if you could, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, I think that the annual suicide report can really be improved by adding some of this information, specifically number 14 and 15 on the data collection or a couple of the social determinants of health that are very regularly talked about as suicide prevention data figures. The highest degree of education and income. Stable housing is also important. We need to know if veterans are engaged at VA with these programs, not simply the last time they went to an appointment at VHA. VBA is oftentimes the front door to VA and VA healthcare system. We need to know if those individuals are utilizing those benefits, what their statuses are. That, I believe, would help us point resources. So we're focusing our suicide prevention efforts in a data-driven model.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. At this time, I'd like to yield back. Mr. Rosendale, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. I think the committee and the Veterans Affairs have adequately exposed the major problems and the constitutional concerns with the data collection legislation and proven that is not ready for prime time. So I would like to move on. Mr. Murray, what IT projects does the VFW believe are not being prioritized correctly?
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Right now, the VA is going through an upgrade and modernization of their VR&E program to digitize a lot of their efforts. Right now, currently, the new digital GI Bill program is underway. The education services have used what they routinely refer to as workarounds, patchwork, outdated legacy systems. These are things that are currently finally being taken care of. It's 2021, it's beyond time. Right now, the Veterans Benefits Management System, VBMS, is how our claims officers work to help deliver benefits delivery to veterans, service members and their families. These are all different IT projects that we believe need to kind of be fully funded up front so they're taken care of, but also some transparency so we can occasionally check in and Congress can do their job to make sure that there's proper oversight on these multi-million, sometimes billion-dollar programs.
Thank you. Sticking with IT, Mr. Murray, if more complete and accurate information could be obtained about VA's IT needs, how would the VFW use it in the independent budget?
One of the things we often advocate for is full upfront funding. Right now, VA's IT budgets, it goes into a general pot and is parsed out as needed, allowing some of these projects to have the full upfront funding from start to completion so that they're not limping along year by year asking for authorization or appropriation to continue these much needed programs. That's something that if we had a full picture of all the IT needs and a priority list, similar to VA's other infrastructure priority list, the SKIP list, that we believe should also have a priority ranking. That would help start identifying projects so they can knock out one after another instead of everything kind of getting a little bit at a time.
So basically, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the transparency then would also provide you with the ability to have predictability and in the budgeting process, so that if someone goes forward, they know, okay, we can count on this amount of money being allocated.
Yes, sir. Upfront funding, especially with VA with the advanced appropriations, really helps set the budget, helps set their process so they can be successful instead of constantly putting out fires as they arise.
Excellent. And Mr. Murray, what improvements does the VFW need to see in the electronic health record modernization program before you could support it being advanced to other parts of the country?
We'd like to see the full cost realized. We'd like to see make sure that all the items, the work items that are necessary are at least identified and begin to get knocked out. Again, we don't want to see that this very critical program is facing hurdles and roadblocks simply because they're trying to put some new server system in an unventilated closet that will overheat and not work. Those are things that can easily be taken care of if they're identified, if they're properly funded and put in the work request to take care of them ahead of time.
So when we look at the implementation and we look at the Spokane facility and say, okay, all of the hard investment, if you will, has been taken care of, and we still do not have what I continue to scream for, a fully functioning system. What do you want to see? I mean, what is your definition of a fully functioning system, assuming that all the hardware is in place?
For us, a fully functioning system is going to take a little while. This are some of the very beginning steps, the first phases of the multi-year project. We understand there are going to be hurdles, but what we want to see is once those hurdles are identified, lessons learned. We want to see what issues were identified and what they're being done to correct them as they continue to move on, to make sure that we're not repeating the same things in each deployment. That would show success. That would be something that we'd be encouraged to see as long as we're making continual progress in this multi-year project.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'll yield back right on the button.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. With that, I'd like to recognize Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Lindsay or Ms. Dain, do you have anything to add to the previous interaction on the IT issue?
I think one of the things we also need to consider is not only the modernization, but the accessibility to veterans who don't have accessibility to IT and tech. So when we reach out, when we look at the standardization and modernization of the implementation, we also need to look at the accessibility issues, which is a different concern on a different committee for sure. But not all veterans have access to having a computer and having other things at phones. So how do we do that? And also the next concern is, how do we standardize a veteran's care from going into the service and then transitioning over to the VA? Is there a seamless process that we can implement that automatically enrolls every veteran in that? And how do we have a touch point to touch them at whenever they transition from the DoD or DHS to the VA? So those would be my only concerns to address accessibility, equity, and access for sure.
Lindsay,
I thank you for the opportunity. I think Mr. Murray hit on the biggest things. Our expertise is more in line with data collection and ensuring that equitable health outcomes happen. But Mr. Murray hit on many of the prime areas for consideration.
Yeah, I'll come back. I want to ask Mr. Murray a few questions, but I want to come back to the equitable issues that flow from having good data. Mr. Murray, in your testimony, I just got to note that we have a history of underfunding VA's infrastructure needs. Can you elaborate on what you see as the major issues related to VA's IT infrastructure and how it could be improved?
Mr. Chairman, VA infrastructure has been underfunded for years. This isn't a current, this year, this administration, this Congress problem. It goes back many years. In a Senate hearing with Kaiser, one of the nation's largest healthcare providers, they said that they put in about 3% of their overall budget into overall infrastructure costs for their entire network. VA is currently putting in about 1% for a substantially larger enterprise. IT is also a critical part of that, and it's never fully recognized. Again, VA infrastructure has the skip list, which is physical buildings. That's critically important as well. But the IT needs to support those buildings, that's also infrastructure. We think that identifying what the needs are, again, fully upfront, transparent, so that they can be fully funded upfront and taken care of so that they're not creating a problem years down the line as we're trying to implement care and benefits.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Lindsay, you discussed adding zip codes as one of the data elements, specifically linking zip codes to rural status. Can you elaborate on the benefits of this, that this data would provide?
Yes, Chairman. This committee has focused a considerable amount of attention on rural veterans, and we believe that the collection of zip code and places that reside will help to enhance the benefits that we deliver to both rural veterans and veterans that reside in island territories. Many of the health outcomes for veterans that live in Puerto Rico, Guam, Northern Marianas are devastatingly bad or poor health outcomes, but we know very little about it. So being able to collect that rural information and where those veterans reside is going to be really important to tailoring solutions directly for rural and island veterans.
Ms. Dain, in your testimony, you quoted a VA employee who discussed perceived bias at VA. How would you see improvements to data collection changing perceived bias at VA?
Well, I think like the expansion of data collection, we would actually know what kind of training and education would be needed to providers and VA employees, especially when populations are strategically left, well, not strategically, that's not an accurate word, but when they're left out of the narrative, we can definitely provide more education, more training, more oversight into these areas, because not only is the veteran community left out, but many of the times also the employee community is left out. We saw some really good improvements for VA providing an employee resource group for LGBTQ employees. This is just a step in the right direction overall, but I think it would, set a precedent of, what this looks like for the employees and also for veterans within the system.
It's logical to kind of assume that in a health system as large and as vast as the VA, it has the second largest workforce across the government, federal government, that we would have, say, providers that might have religious objections that have to be respected, religious objections that, even though I disagree with them, to treating, say, a trans veteran. Might this data collection help us be able to prevent conflicts happening in terms of making sure that we don't humiliate, say, a trans veteran?
Absolutely.
Who may not know that they're going to see. I mean, has that happened, that trans veterans or LGBT veterans have run into providers within the system who may actually be hostile or say disagree with who they are?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. There's been many occasions, I think on a daily basis, I get an email about this specifically occurring, especially for trans veterans. We know that the DoD is the #1 employer for trans individuals. So whenever we look at the VA and people transitioning, this is a huge area of improvement. And we could, the healthcare system could corner the market on the revolutionary science that comes behind and making sure that we're taking care of all individuals. And if there are objectors for, care for trans, veterans, I think that should be known on both sides. I mean, I want to see a provider that's, affirmative of my care. And I know Lindsay also has some more insight into that, but making sure that we're having affirmative care on all sides. And if you're not affirmative of LGBTQ care, I would prefer to see a different provider. And I will respect your decision on that, but I would love to see a different provider to make sure that, the LGBTQ community is cared for in the most accurate way.
Lindsay, you have a response as well?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. This happens on a regular basis, and I think the enhancement of our patient records, both with gender identity, sexual orientation, especially pronouns, will help to enhance the experience. I have talked to the VA this morning, and 5 times they called me Miss Church. That's not acceptable. This happens every single time I go to a VA facility. I'm either called ma'am or sir, and every time that I talk to a provider, it's Miss Church. If my health record indicated that my pronouns, not my preferred pronouns, but my actual pronouns, were they and them, they might respect that. We get emails and contacts from people regularly, trans veterans, LGBTQ veterans, that have these experiences with providers that don't care to treat them in a holistic and comprehensive way. We need to understand this information. Like Jen said, I don't want a provider that doesn't think that my life matters and that my human dignity matters. I don't want that provider. So if VA can help me not get that provider, I would love that. And I think many people would absolutely love that, to be able to know that their provider cares for them and cares about their health outcomes, because it's not just about how I experience somebody calling me Miss Church. It's a matter of, do they understand the unique health equity problems that exist for people like me? It's a huge issue when it comes to health outcomes that are unique to our community, but happen pervasively. This is not by accident. So we have to get to a point where we understand all of these components of a veteran's identity if we're going to address the suicide, homelessness, substance use, all of the issues and crises that we see. More nuanced data will help us understand that, and more nuanced data on our electronic health records will actually help us have a better experience with VA entirely.
So, I'm an out gay representative in the Congress. I have to confess something that I've learned a lot in my own lifetime about what it is, the trans experience, and the importance of calling you by what you prefer to be called by, which is Lindsay. So even for those of us in the LGBT community, we're learning. And we also understand that for America broadly, that Americans are broadly learning about this as well. And people are at different stages of understanding and may not fully understand the humiliation involved when we don't refer to people by what they prefer to be called by. And the tremendous cultural change that has to happen across all health systems, including the VA. And we're just talking, and I see tremendous progress being made in private healthcare systems, that they want to be respectful and certainly don't want to contribute to the mental health anguish of people who had struggles all of their lives with a world that does not understand them. And so certainly we also want to be respectful of those people who have religious convictions as providers within the VA. So I think we can meet both different points of view, both respect the diversity of religious points of view, but also insist on respect for different individuals who use the VA. And I think we can come to a meeting point, but the data collection, I think, is an important step in trying to make sure that both on the provider side with deep convictions and the patient side, but also respecting we also have people who are trans and LGBT providers as well. So, Mr. Chairman, I do have one more question that I want to ask Mr. Mr. Murray. In your testimony, Mr. Murray, you discussed how demographic data collection might impact veteran suicide rates. Can you speak more about how you see this data helping to prevent veteran suicide?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've spoken about this with VA. The VFW is not the first people that have said social determinants of health are excellent suicide prevention tools, stable housing, proper income, the sense of self. These are things that you can get from some of the programs that VBA, such as GI Bill, the home loan, or disability compensation might provide. Everybody is solely looking at visits to VHA in their suicide prevention report. When's the last time they went in for a healthcare appointment, possibly mental health care appointment? But what we don't know is when their last touch point with all of VA could be. We'd like to see data from VBA included in that as well.
And what you're talking about is predictive analytics, but you need the data to do the predictive analytics, right? To notice the patterns. I mean, tremendously useful in trying to understand veteran isolation, people live in rural areas versus urban areas, et cetera.
Absolutely, sir. It's what we found is that numbers help generate a lot of this information, a lot of the resources that we can point to, so we're accurately, instead of just, as Lindsay said, throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. We want to be able to point and target our efforts. We think that having better knowledge, better income, especially with some of the information that, as VA has said, they already collect some of this. We just want it included in the report. VA said they'll consider it, right? They've said that for a few years, but we believe it's time to direct them to include it in the annual suicide report.
And that's where I think the sense of direction comes from. But we also, I do hear the ranking member's concern about HIPAA and privacy and the potential. I can understand someone with religious convictions being worried about an overreach of government. I think people who are LGBT also understand that very same issue. The misuse of data and the wrong-headed administrator who wants to persecute religious minorities or even just religious people versus also people who are LGBT. So the ranking member, I just want the ranking member to know that a sensitivity to that. I have that sensitivity as well. So, but I think we need, but we cannot prevent, I think, the really important big data use that would help us get at this suicide prevention goal that we have, and it's a high priority of mine. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I did take liberties, but I know we have a smaller group of people, and I thought we could knock it out all at once. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. At this time, I would just like to say that I would like to thank the committee for all their hard work on these pieces of legislation. I consistently want to say that I believe that this is a matter of national security as far as making our diverse armed services and services men and women attracting the greatest talent that we have in our nation. And it is a focus point to make sure that we deliver world-class healthcare. And in doing so, collecting the data and also providing cost analysis when it comes to the EHRM and moving forward with those projects. With that, I would like to thank the witnesses for their participation today. Your testimony and comments have been helpful, and we will consider them as we move forward with these bills. All members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.